And welcome back to WCCF Tech TV, everyone. This is Keith again, and today we are talking about Resident Evil 7 and its performance on the PC. Now, the new Resident Evil 7 is running off the RE engine, which I can only assume is the Resident Evil engine. So what's special about this? Well, it has very limited load or minimal load times since it streams in the game while you're playing it, which makes kind of testing, well, a little bit more difficult than normal because you have to isolate a section of the game and run it within that realm and avoid any loading times, which could result in, well, wildly fluctuating frame rates. So right off the bat, let's go ahead and get into the settings that we used while testing this game. We started off at 1080p, of course. We did 1080, 1440, and 4K. We did it full screen with an 80-degree field of vision, variable refresh rate, or variable frame rate, no VSync, rendering method on normal because there is interlaced and it will boost performance, but it will degrade the image quality, and we did not want to use that. Resolution scaling left at 1, so 1:1. Texture quality very high, texture filtering very high, mesh very high, anti-aliasing we stuck with FXAA for these results, so if our numbers are higher than other people's, this might be one of the reasons why. Motion blur was left on, effects rendering left to high, depth of field on, shadow quality high, very high, dynamic shadows on, shadow cache on, ambient occlusion was left to SSAO. Again, maybe different than what other people used when they reviewed this game, so could account for a variance in numbers that we had versus them. Bloom was left on, chromatic aberration was left on, and the color space was left to sRGB. Now let's jump into the game itself.
Using the new GTX 1060 in this build instead of the RX 480.
Now, before we see the results, I'm going to do a little pass through of the section of the game that we used for our test section, which was actually one of the first areas that you enter the home. Now, we picked this area for several reasons. One, it has a lot of different lighting effects. It goes from light to dark, as well as has light shafts, water, reflections. It just seems to have a very wide range of what to expect while you're actually playing the game. And without any enemies popping up through this section, it was easily repeatable. And once I found the load points, I was able to get consistent results. So that's how we got the numbers that we have today. Now, starting off at 1080p, unlike normal for the video purposes, we're only going to show the averages. If you want to see the 1% and 0.1% lows, please hit the link in the description and see the article with much more fleshed out graphs. We just wanted to keep it easily read on the video. Now, 1080p, of course, the GTX 1080 takes away the lead with 182 FPS average, followed fairly closely by the Fury X at 160. However, you'll want to take a look at that article and see the caveats that you get with any of these cards here that are running at 4 gigs of VRAM. And of course, going down the list, and notice I said something about 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Look what happens when you get down to the RX 460 and the GTX 1050. The 1050 at these settings is completely useless and absolutely unplayable with an average of 20 FPS, with its minimums dropping down into the ones, single digits. I don't know about you, but that's not how I like to play my games. Now, stepping things up to 1440p, we see a very similar trend here. However, the Nano and the Nano actually surpassed the Fury X. I ran that test at least 10 times to get the average on 1440p, but it just came out that way every time. I think the rock star in this whole thing is the R9390, because it's a bit of an older card, bit of a brute, but it's putting out numbers almost right there on par with the Fury X and the Nano, and not too terribly far behind a 980 Ti. Now, if you want to check the 1% and 0.1% lows on that, you'll see why those numbers are much more impressive on the 390, having its 8 gigabytes of VRAM versus the one surrounding its 4 gigs. Even the RX 480 benefited greatly from that 8 gigs. Now, jumping things up to 4K, well, there's only 3 cards on here that's really going to give you a bit of a playable experience, and that's going to be the GTX 1080, the 980 Ti, as well as the Fury X. The Fury X, the VRAM actually didn't seem to be as much of a problem at this resolution because you needed some grunt, and luckily that card did provide a bit of grunt. There was a bit of stuttering with it, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it was at 1080 and 1440 for some reason. Now, the 980 Ti was fairly playable, and the 1080 was quite a smooth experience. Basically, with this game, if you're staying over 45 or around 45, you're going to get a fairly smooth experience. Keep in mind those 1% and 0.1% lows that we've got posted over on the article, because that is going to be a very big indicator of the experience that you're going to get with this game. And quite frankly, any card that's got 4 gigs of VRAM is really limiting it, and you really are going to have to start making some compromises with the graphical fidelity of this game, which is a bit unfortunate. But the game is absolutely gorgeous and is really heavy on the lighting. Textures are, even though it's using a lot of VRAM, the textures are mostly in lighting and effects. So that's really been where we are, guys. I hope you feel free to leave a like and subscribe and leave a comment if you have any questions, and we will catch you all in the next video.